Hi, I'm Andrew Unger, author of The Daily Bonnet and the new novel Once Removed. Today I figured I'd give you some tips and advice on how to research your family history and genealogy. We're probably looking at a beginner level here, so for some of you, you may be more advanced than this, but you might learn something too, who knows. Anyways, so let's check it out. Probably the most important thing that you can do when you're researching your family history and genealogy is talking to family members. And maybe stating the obvious, but a lot of times we only become interested in our family history and genealogy when we're older ourselves, and maybe the people that we could have talked to, it's too late in some circumstances. Talk to those grandparents and uncles and aunts and great uncles and before you're even interested. Probably if you're watching this video you are interested, but there could be situations where you kind of have an interest or whatever. Well, ask those questions now. Talk to them now while you still can. I got these, I've only seen these recently. I got these documents from my grandmother, and these are my grandfather's. He came to Canada in 1925. Immigration documents. This is my grandfather here, Heinrich Bergman, born in Rukhanel, Russia. And this one, I think, is the treasure of them all. From Russia, and it has his name, Heinrich Bergman, 5 years old, with his photo and written in Russian and English. So like I say, talk to your grandparents or whoever you know that might have this stuff. You never know what they might have in a shoebox somewhere that might be really, really amazing stuff. Old photographs, who knows? Another place that I found that is really useful is visiting archives. A lot of people know about museums and they visit museums, but not a lot of people know about archives, what they are. A museum collects artifacts and an archives collects, for the most part, documents. A lot of times people are maybe intimidated to go to an archives because, you go to a museum, you pay your admission, you know what's there, you know what to expect. But with an archive, you might not know, what do I do? How do I go there? You know what? Show up to your local archive. Talk to your archivist. They, like librarians, will probably be very receptive and helpful. And just tell them, hey, you know what? I'm new at this, but I want to find information about my family history. And you'd be surprised maybe what you can find at the archives. So where I live in Manitoba, there's a lot of archives, and I'm sure where you live too. So one of the places I like to go, because I have a Mennonite background, is the Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg at the Canadian Mennonite University. Conrad Stace there is a great resource for information. And I'll put a link below that kind of has a tour of that particular archives. You may not live in this area, so it may be some other archives, but it'll give you a little bit of a sense of what archives are like and that they are accessible to the public. It's not just academics and researchers who can access archives. So let me tell you about one of my ancestors that I learned about recently with the help of the archives. And that is Abraham Reimer, who was my great-great-great-grandfather. Abraham came to Canada in the 1870s, lived in the Blumenort area, and he kind of developed this nickname. A lot of Mennonites had nicknames, and some of them were had positive connotations, some of them had negative connotations. His nickname was Fuderreimer, which means lazy rhymer. Why was he given this name? Well, at that time, if you weren't really all that interested in agriculture, farming, that sort of thing, then obviously you must be lazy. But Fuderreimer, Abraham Reimer, my great-great-great-grandfather, was not a lazy man. He kept a meticulous diary for years and this diary has been really valuable to people researching not only what life was like in southern Ukraine at that time, but also the early years when Mennonites first arrived in Manitoba. And I think probably by the standards of the 1870s, I would be probably considered a fula too. If you're a writer, if you had any free time, and if you spent it learning and reading and writing, you probably would have been put into that category by the standards of those particular Mennonites in that time. So I kind of think it was of Fula Rhymer. I'm claiming that nickname. I will take it upon myself. You can call me Fula Unger if you want to call me that. I had heard about the Abraham Reimer diaries, but I didn't know where they were. Where would they even be? Did some like relative have them, or where are they? And I discovered they're actually at the Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg. So I went there, spoke to Conrad, and I was actually able to see the actual handwritten diary, the very famous Abraham Reimer diary from my great great grandfather. I could touch the page carefully and actually see the words that he wrote. And I've also actually read a translation of it. It was just amazing just to be able to touch and see these documents. It's one thing to read in a book something that one of your ancestors wrote, but the artifact itself, I think, has a lot of value too. To have that connection with this physical thing. It's not just words, but it's this physical thing. And that I really appreciated the chance to do that. The next one I'm going to talk about is probably the one that most people are really familiar with, and that is the internet, the websites. There's websites, I don't even need to mention them. They advertise to you. I don't use one of the big websites that you've all heard about. Because I'm Mennonite, I can use this other one, which I'll talk to you about in a second. One of the websites I like to use is Grandma Online. Grandma Online works really well if you've got a Russian Mennonite background, and it's way cheaper than some of those other websites. One of the kind of neat things that's especially good for Mennonites here is that it has a relationship search. So you can type in any two Mennonite names and see how closely they're related. This is especially good for dating couples. But, one of my favorites, I'm not going to go through all of these because there's tons of different charts and lists that you can generate, is this one here, which has lists of all your your parents, your grandparents, your great great grandparents, great 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 grandparents, who they are, when they were born, when they died, where they lived, all that kind of stuff. And you can just keep going back and back and back. Like, look how long this is. As the title of my new novel, Once Removed, suggests, the book has at least something to do with family relationships, genealogy, that sort of thing. So I'll read you this section where two of the main characters, a husband and wife, they go to the archives to do some research, and they end up being convinced to check out their genealogy. Old Stuff Timothy led us to his office, where he typed a few words into his computer, which still had a clunky old monitor and a floppy drive. I assume you've come here for your genealogy. That's what most people come here for. It can even tell you if you're related, he said, then pointed at Katie. The two of you, we can see if you're Friendschaft. No thanks, I said. But Katie perked up. I think this would be valuable information, she said. Let's see the results. I really didn't want to know. When it comes to information about how closely you are related to your wife, I think ignorance is bliss. But Katie said she was curious and it would be harmless, and Old Stuff Timothy said the whole procedure would be more or less painless. Do I have to pee into a cup or something? I asked. No, nothing like that. I just need your name and a birth date, he explained. For both of you. According to Old Stuff Timothy, all you had to do was type our names into some genealogy software, and within a few seconds, it would churn out the myriad ways in which we are related. And related Katie and I are, in more than 30 different ways. Fourth cousins once removed, fifth cousins once removed, sixth cousins twice removed, seventh cousins once removed. It kept going. It doesn't go back further than the 16th century, he said. Otherwise, we'd find more connections. Well, that's a relief. I figured I'd throw up some vocabulary up here. If you're new to doing genealogical research, you may find this useful, because these terms, sometimes people use them and they don't even know what they mean actually. So siblings, of course, you share a parent. First cousins, you share at least one grandparent. When you get into second, third, fourth cousins, second cousins, share a great-grandparent. Third cousins, share a great-great-grandparent, etc. And when we're talking about once removed, twice removed, that has to do with a generational gap. So first cousins once removed would be your cousin's child or your parent's cousin. First cousins twice removed would be your cousin's grandchild or your grandparent's cousin. Again, and then you could just keep extending that to 3 times removed, 4 times removed. based on generations. The website that I found useful is trailsofthepast.com, made by Brent Weave and some other people. It has a lot of interesting stuff related to Mennonite history, but the part in terms of genealogy, the part that was really useful for me was this part right here, where it has the archives. Now, half my ancestors, as I said in one of the other videos, came to Canada in the 1870s. The other half came in the 1920s, fleeing the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and all the violence from the Makhnovists and later Bolsheviks, all that sort of thing that was going on there. They came to Canada as refugees. My grandfather was 5 years old when he came in 1925. On my grandmother's side, though, her father and mother were the only ones that came of their family. And the rest of the family, in other words, all her uncles and aunts, stayed in the Soviet Union. And I had heard stories about what had happened to them, about how some of her uncles just disappeared, were taken away. But I never really knew the details about that. But recently, the KGB archives have been released publicly, finally. And it's a little bit difficult to research because you have to be able to read Cyrillic and all that kind of stuff. But this Trails of the Past website has this section, if you go to Archives Records, where you can click on whether your ancestors lived in Russia or Ukraine and search, and they've translated it into English. So you can just use the search feature here. And this is my grandmother's uncle, one of the uncles that went missing. And it has all the information that the KGB had of him. And this, I had known this before, that he was arrested in December 16th, 1937. I'd heard about that before, but I'd never discovered this before. Special NKVD Troika, the sentencing, Special NKVD Troika, which I'm assuming is some sort of trial, fake trial. And look at this, October 9th, 1938, sentenced to death. If you can, try to also look for local history books or family history books. A lot of times people have these and they don't even realize it. Maybe your uncle or aunt or grandmother, somebody has that book, the family history book. I have loads of them myself, and some of them, are nice hardcover books like this, and some of them are thin volumes in a duotang, spiral bound ones. But regardless of the binding, these books can provide some really valuable information. And the last thing that I recommend doing is actually visiting, if you can, historic sites, especially cemeteries, to actually make that connection with those people, those ancestors, that family history. If you can travel, when we can travel, maybe visit the village where your ancestors came from. My wife and I were actually intending to, this summer, visit Ukraine to see the village where my grandfather was born. Unfortunately, that was canceled because of the pandemic. But hopefully sometime in the future I'll be able to visit that place. But I have made some really interesting connections and in some of the historic sites and cemeteries just around in the area where I live here. And perhaps you can make those connections in the places where you live too. So one of the interesting stories, sad stories, that I discovered when researching my family history was that of Maria Unger, who was my grandfather's older sister. And she died in 1918. At the time, I think my grandfather would have been about 7 years old. They had very big families, many brothers and sisters. And one of his older sisters, who was 18, I believe at the time, died in 1918 of the Spanish flu, which is something that we've heard a lot more about recently because of our own pandemic that we've been going through. According to Dr. Glenn Clausen and others who've done research on this, Mennonites in this part of southern Manitoba died at twice the rate of the Spanish flu as other people groups, probably because they weren't social distancing. When I was doing some research, I discovered that my great aunt was buried at the Blumenhof Cemetery, and I had to figure out where Blumenhof was, and when I figured out where that was, I had to figure out where the cemetery was. It took a bit of effort to find this place, but here we are at the Blumenhof Cemetery, and I think she's buried here somewhere. So on the back of this, there's actually the list of, see here, this is her name here, Maria P. Unger, daughter of Peter F. Unger. Born November 28th, 1899, died December 10th, 1918. So she should be buried here somewhere. Right here. See. I was looking at Royden Lowen's classic Blumenort book. Can you look how thick that is? All just about Blumenort in Hanover. And I was flipping through this, and I found this picture. Look at that. Blumenhof Girls, 1917. The girls on their way to Jacob L. Pletz after church. Justina P. Unger, must also be a relative. Maria P. Unger. The second one. There she is. Just months before she died. Another story I discovered when researching my family history was that of Reverend Jacob Barkman, who was my great-great-great, three of them, great-great-great-grandfather. And he was Steinbach's spiritual leader and the kind of the leader of the group that came and settled and founded Steinbach in 1874. Tragically, what I discovered was he actually died in 1875. He went on a supply run to Winnipeg to get supplies for the fledgling community of Steinbach, and sadly he and Mr. Friesen drowned in the Red River in 1875, just a year after they arrived here. And so I was trying to find, and I heard and I read that he was buried here at the Pioneer Cemetery in Steinbach, but there are no headstones. I've looked at almost all of them. There are no headstones from 1875. There's a few from the 1800s, but none that are that old. So if he is buried here, it's unmarked. But this cenotaph here, it says in memory of the pioneers who founded Steinbach, and it lists all of Steinbach's original settlers. I'm related to actually a few of them. I know it's kind of like this odd thing in 2020 to live in the same town that your ancestors founded almost 150 years ago, but I literally am like related to like 2 or 3 of these people. And on the back here it talks about Reverend Barkman and Mr. Friesen, who drowned June 3rd, 1875. Another tragic story. Have fun researching your family history and genealogy. I hope you found this helpful. See you.